Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks again for joining us here today. I'm Carolina Alberna, CEO at the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce in Toronto, and on behalf of the organizers, we'd like to welcome you all to the fourth and last session of the first Brazil-Canada Agriculture Forum, organized in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce Brazil-Canada based in São Paulo. I'll be your MC today, together with Elisa Nolli from CCBC. Before we start, for those who are not aware, on September 30th, Canada acknowledges the impact of residential schools on Indigenous communities across this country. The residential school system in Canada served as mandatory boarding schools for Indigenous youth and was run by churches and the federal government for more than 130 years, from 1863 to 1998. The children are often not allowed to speak their language or practice their culture, and many were mistreated and abused. In 2015, a National Center of Truth and Reconciliation report estimated that more than 150,000 children attended these schools, and more than 6,000 children died. As you may know, last Thursday, the remains of 215 children have been found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia that was closed in 1978. And on last Sunday, May 30th, the Canadian government signed an agreement with the Assembly of First Nations, pledging to pay a lump sum in compensation for former students of Indian residential schools. The residential school political agreement marks an unprecedented policy shift for Canada, as previously only former students who were victims of sexual or physical abuses were to receive monetary reparation. And Indian activists complained at that time that the earlier plan ignored the damage that schools caused through their suppression of native languages and cultures. Knowing our history and recognizing our past is a significant step to make repairs and avoid history to repeat itself. So today I'm wearing orange to support the cause. As we all know, every child matters. So a few housekeeping rules moving forward into the event is speakers will be available to answer questions after all presentations are done. All questions should be asked through the Q&A box located in the bottom of your screen. We had allowed attendees to upvote and answer questions to incentive positive discussion, so feel free to add comments and questions throughout the presentation. We will do our best to address all points raised during the Q&A session at the end of the program. In a few minutes, we'll also be launching a poll with a few questions that will help us guide the discussion during the event. So I encourage all of you to participate. Now I'd like to invite Elisa to say a few words.
Thanks, Carolina. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elisa Nolli. I'm the Business Development Coordinator at the CCBC here in São Paulo. And today is the last session of our Brazil-Canada Agriculture Forum. First of all, we'd like to thank all the participants and, of course, our speakers. And today we'll focus on the sustainable agriculture in Brazil. And we have prepared a lot of great presentations for you. We'll listen about the Brazilian investment program in sustainable agriculture, the global challenges in the sector, biodiversity, and everything regarding the certificates and their role in achieving sustainable in the agribusiness. So we hope you enjoy the session and everything we have prepared for you. Back to you, Carolina.
Thank you, Elisa. So just before I introduce our first speaker today, I'd like to thank our sponsors for their support: Vale, Export Development Canada, Brookfield Asset Management, Sescom Barrier, Lundin Mining, Toronto Stock Exchange and TSX Ventures, Nutrien, Fairfax, Port St. John, and Mellowhawk Logistics, as well as our partners, the Embassy of Brazil in Canada, the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply, and the Embassy of Canada to Brazil and Global Affairs Canada. I'm gonna just launch the polls. So while I introduce our first panelists, I would like you guys to take a look and participate. We really encourage everyone to join us and participate on this. So I would also like to offer a special thanks to Proativa Consulting, to Dulce Medal Benke for her support in putting this program together, as well as the BCC ESG committee members led by Rafael Benke from Proativa, Luciano Souza from Sescom Barrier, and Iman Kara from Brookfield. So Dulce is the leader of Proactiva Sustainability and Sustainable Finance Units and focus on development, risks, and ESG indicators for sustainable finance projects. She has 15 years of experience in sustainability, climate change, and agriculture. And prior to joining Proactiva, Dulce was an expert in the United Nations Foundation, where she actively participated in the development of globally adopted sustainability indicators for biofuels, such as the Roundtable for Sustainable Biofuels and the Global Bioenergy Partnership. She led the Institutional Development Department of the non-governmental organization Conservation International in Brazil and was a project director of the Brazilian Rural Society, where she led the areas of sustainability, sustainable finance, innovation, and technology. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you, Dulce Medalbenki, to provide the opening remarks. Dulce, stage is yours.
Thank you, Carolina. Good afternoon to all, to my colleagues, panelists. Good afternoon to the audience here with us. I'd like to start thanking the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce and CCBC for the invitation to deliver these opening remarks. And also I'd like to congratulate this initiative and to start this dialogue between Brazil and Canada in this key sector. I understand this is the first round of events and it's only the starting point of an agenda with huge opportunities for collaboration between these two countries, Brazil and Canada. I'm very honored to be here today, bringing some key points, some very general points of the sustainable agriculture agenda globally and in Brazil. As Carolina mentioned, I have been working with sustainability, agriculture, and climate change for almost 20 years now. I had the privilege to participate in the very beginning of the discussion on sustainability and on the sustainability of the agricultural sector globally. And that was exactly when all the roundtables, the Roundtable for Responsible Soil, Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, Roundtable for Sustainable Biofuels, what I call today the Better Sugarcane Initiative, we're discussing what would be those indicators, those criteria and those indicators that would say this agriculture is sustainable or not. So after that, I had the opportunity to look on the connection of climate change, agriculture at the Conservation International. Before joining Proactiva, I had a very good experience with the private sector and the agriculture sector. And I have many colleagues here today that I have the privilege to work with during this journey. So talking a little bit about Proactiva and what I'm doing today. Proactiva is a consulting boutique specialized in ESG. And we work structuring ESG framework, gap analysis, risk mapping, and we have a unit dedicated to the agribusiness sectors, which is also under my responsibility, besides the sustainable finance pillar. As I see, we could not be in a better moment for this discussion that we are having today. And I'm delighted to be part of this panel, this discussion together with such brilliant specialists and together with many colleagues. So I have maybe 3 or 4 slides to share with you today. So we can go to the first one. I brought this first one because I think this is one of the key considerations that I'd like to make today. We had, during the last 15 years, I think we had a change in the stakeholders group that are engaged in the sustainability discussion. And I think this is very important to take into consideration when we are talking about sustainable agriculture, being in Brazil, in Canada, globally, and to understand that what used to be a discussion in the international organizations or a discussion being made by the big NGOs in the beginning, and later on we had a greater participation by the civil society, and then the private sector. And now today we have not only NGOs, organizations, governments, and private sector, but we have a very important voice that hadn't come to the table so far. That is the financial sector. And I think this is really a shift for the sustainability agenda. That is what we are calling today the ESG agenda. And And clearly we gain complexity. This agenda is gaining complexity over the years, and not only by the matters or the issues it has been addressing, but it's gaining complexity as well by the number of stakeholders, by the number of actors that are engaged in this agenda, actively engaged in this agenda, and helping to drive this agenda. So what I would add to this figure that we have now, that I think is very important today as well, and especially for the agri-sector, is the final consumers. We have been discussing for, if I remind, for the last 15 years or 20 years, when the consumers would come to the table and would help to drive this agenda, would help to shape this agenda. And I understand, besides the financial sector that is actively shaping this agenda, we have now a very more active participation of the consumers in choosing which product they are going to buy, in choosing which investments they are going to make. I think if you go from millennials on, the millennials, Y generation, the mindset is completely different. So and all the business and the financial sector are looking at that and shaping their activities to respond to this, let's say, new demand that we have. So this is just to set the stage, and for us to have in mind that we are in a much more complex environment. And of course, that today we have also much more complexity in the issues that we have been discussing regarding the sustainability agenda. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, that's fine. So when you talk about sustainability, what comes to our mind immediately when you talk about sustainability or sustainable agriculture, what comes to our mind immediately is the deforestation agenda. And this is really maybe the key issue that we have now in the sector, that is directly connected with the carbon emissions agenda, the climate change agenda, consequently the risks that the climate change are posing to us, and especially to the agriculture environments, and it, of course, is directly connected to the goals and the commitments that countries have under the climate agenda. So, and it's not by accident that the carbon emissions or climate change is also being one of the key drivers of the ESG agenda, and is gaining more and more attention for investors. So when it comes to our mind, we think about deforestation, and then we think about maybe water issues, the efficient use of water, and then talking about agriculture, we come to soil degradation, that is also critical for ecosystem services, and then carbon emissions. But what I'd like to come to the end was really this figure in the middle, because today we are, as I said, we have a much more complex environment of stakeholders, of actors, and we have a much more complex environment of issues involved in the sustainability agenda today. So on the environment, I think they are more we are used to these issues on our daily basis. For people that work with environment, that I said is deforestation, and then we go for carbon emissions, soil degradation. Then we come maybe to an issue that has been discussed for a long time, but is gaining also some attention now, that is the biodiversity issue. And then we come to water use. We have some other issues here on the environmental points, but I think here we brought the main ones. But then when we look to the social side, of this equation and the agri-sector, it's clear, and we have been working at Proactiva with a number of companies from the agricultural sector. And it's clear there is a long way to work, to understand first, and then to address the social issues. I'm going to talk a little bit about trends, but we have the human rights, business and human rights agenda. Then we have the agenda of land conflicts that it has been looked for some time now. And I understand that João Adrien, that's speaking after me, is going to address this point also from the government point of view. Then we have affected communities, we have modern slavery and traditional and indigenous communities that need also to be taken into consideration when you talk about sustainability. And then we have all the governance being maybe diversity, one of the key issues being discussed, and in the agri sector is not different. We are having a lot of discussion about diversity. And then we have some others, transparency, monitoring, reporting, that are also key points of the ESG agenda. And then here, I brought some ESG trends or sustainability trends for the sector that I understand are key, and the sector needs to start addressing and needs to start looking if it's not looking yet. So as I said, the ESG agenda poses a new lens on sustainability, where we need to be strategic, we need to understand our risks, we need to understand our impacts, we need to monitor, we need to work on transparency, and that brings a lot of opportunity, and for the business sector especially. Transparency, as I mentioned, is one of the key points of this agenda. And I think Brazil has, when you look to the agriculture in Brazil, and you look to transparency, and you look on communication, I understand we have a long way to go. We do a lot in Brazil. We know that we have been observing and following the development of the agribusiness sector over the last 15, 30, 20 years. And if you look on what happened in Brazil, is really impressive in terms of productivity, increased productivity, efficiency, digital agriculture, and so on. But we need to communicate that. We have the forest code that is maybe the most restricted environment and forestry policy in commodity producing countries. But we need to communicate that. We need to implement that. And I hope João is also going to touch on this point in his speech as well. So transparency is key for the agenda from now on. And the sector needs to start on data, needs to start on understanding its risks, needs to start to address these risks in a very clear way and reporting that. So carbon, where we talked a little bit, but we have also the natural capital coming to the table, understand how to value natural capital, how to include natural capital in financial evaluations. And we are seeing a lot of movements on this regard. So it's also a point of attention. The agenda of business and human rights is developing very fast. It's entering the sector very fast. We have been following the developments in Brazil, and it's becoming mandatory globally. So we're starting with the EU taxonomy that has the due diligence on human rights, and one of the, it's mandatory as one of the salvaguards. And then it goes to national legislation, as French already has a national legislation on human rights. We see some points of the UN guiding principles on human rights can be incorporated in certifications like the Rainforest Alliance, some other certifications also discussing the incorporation of this agenda or of the guiding principles of the United Nations. So this is also a point of attention and a trend for the sector that are beyond what have been discussed as deforestation and other issues is also very important to be addressed. And then we have low carbon agriculture as maybe the basis and becoming central in the challenges of the climate change agenda. We don't talk more about agriculture without looking through the lens of low carbon agriculture, or what we could do to turn that practice or that crop or that region as a low carbon agriculture region, low carbon agriculture practice. And then just to end, we have all the discussions around the zero deforestation that are underway for the last 4 years, and also becoming and also becoming regulation in some countries. So this is also a point of attention. We understand there is a lot of issues, a lot of sensitiveness on this agenda. Especially in the Cerrado, I think in the Amazon, we have it much more clear and shaped with criteria, but in Cerrado, we still have many issues to discuss, but this is also something that the sector needs to pay attention. And just to end, the opportunities of the carbon markets, and I would add here the opportunities of the sustainable finance markets. So we have trillions of dollars available to finance impact, to finance low carbon agriculture, to help the transition to a low carbon economy. And we need to take that into consideration when we are looking for the agriculture sector in a strategic way. In Brazil, we have been seeing a little bit of a change on how the agriculture sector is financing itself. So we see already the medium and big companies, more the big companies, looking at these opportunities, the market, the capital markets opportunities, and this is a direct link to the sustainable finance, sustainable green bonds, green grass, and the opportunities of the impact agenda, right, globally. So I think I'll stop here, Carol, just to end. I think many of the issues that I mentioned here are going to be addressed in the next session. We have, as I mentioned, João Adrian presenting what the Brazilian government is doing to address some of the issues that I mentioned and support the development of sustainable agriculture in Brazil. In the first panel, we'll be discussing the challenges of sustainable agriculture in Brazil and globally, and I'm sure they're going to touch on some of the points that I brought here. And in the third panel, we want to bring success cases from the Amazon. So I'll end here. I wish everybody a very fruitful discussion, and I really expect that we can not only be together this afternoon, but we can continue working together along our journeys. Thank you.
Once again, thank you so much, Dulce, for helping us putting together such a great program. And now I have the honor to introduce João Adrian, Special Advisor on Social Environmental Issues at the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply, to present the Brazilian Investment Program in Sustainable Agriculture. Welcome, João. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation. It's a pleasure for the Ministry of Agriculture to be part of this very important panel. I saw a lot of friends here. Dulce, we work together in the Brazilian Rural Society, so it's a pleasure to discuss with you these common issues. Thank you, Carolina, for the invitation, and all the panelists that are here. I'm gonna share my screen with you to present my presentation. So I will speak to you over the Ministry of Agriculture strategy to promote the sustainable tropical agriculture for a low carbon development. As you know, Brazil is a very important country for food production, fiber, and also renewable fuels supply. And also we are known as the inventors of a tropical agriculture, as I may speak. So we do have this characteristic, and now and here in my presentation I will go further on this issue. I would like also to say hello to our agriculture attaché, Paulo Márcio, that is now in Canada, and before he was working with us here in the Ministry of Agriculture. So good to see you, Paulo, as well. We focus on our strategy to promote this sustainable agriculture in four main pillars that are agenda that are over responsible from the Ministry of Agriculture. So we do have the first step. The first issue is land management. This agenda is a very sensible agenda, but it's a very important one. All the issues of land tenure and land regularization is now Ministry of Agriculture responsibility, and this issue is very important for us to go further and to have a real land tenure and land management consolidated in Brazil. The second pillar is environmental conservation and restoration on private properties. As Dulce mentioned, Brazil has the Forest Code, which is a legislation that obliges the farmers to protect and restore native vegetations area. So this is under our responsibility. So this is our priority, one of our priority. Third is sustainable agriculture technologies, to spread this sustainable agriculture technology. We do have a very important program that I will talk a little bit more further forward. And the fourth one is to guarantee rural families' income, because we need to pay attention that all this sustainable improvement consider rural family incomes and consider the social aspect of this. As you know, I don't know if you may know, but as you may know, Brazil has a long-term target to be neutral, to be neutral on carbon in 2050. This is our NDC, our Paris Agreement target. And with these four pillars, we are hoping that we will develop a low carbon agriculture to have an increase in food, fiber, and renewable food, and also to increase rural family incomes. So these main pillars, these four main pillars, where we are putting all our efforts, our main policies, and also our investments, public investments, and also promoting private investments to support this initiative. First, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more regarding our land use. I don't know if you know, but Brazil, beside of being a very important country for food, fiber, renewable food supply, we still have a very important environmental asset. 66% of our territory is still covered with native vegetation. So this is a very important asset that Brazil has, and we're working to conserve it and to restore it. And another very important aspect of these situations, that 20% of this native vegetation is located on private properties. This is preliminary studies that show this 20%, but this is another very interesting issue that farmers in Brazil has this responsibility to protect. And we do have a lot of environmental assets on private farmers that that put our farmers to be a food production and also a native vegetation preserver. So these are maybe our two main responsibility for our farmers. It's very important for us to remember that Brazilian tropical agriculture is based on productivity increase. For the last 50 years, our production increased, the area cultivated for grain increased 33%, while the productivity increasing 386%. So it's interesting for us to connect that productivity has a very important connection with land preservation, because if we hadn't had this increase in productivity, if we keep the productivity from the 80s, we will need more than 120 million hectares for production. So it's very important to remember that productivity has a very important role in conservation, to develop an agriculture that is intensive in technology, intensive in capital, and not intensive in land. So I would like to describe here our main sustainable agriculture program. This ABC plan is a policy to develop and to promote low carbon agriculture. ABC is Agricultura de Baixo Carbono, which is low carbon agriculture. And this is our plan to promote sustainable, resilience, and competitive agriculture system. And this also is a program that boosts adaptation, mitigation, efficiency, resilience, and integrated landscape management over a scenario of climate changes, insecurity, and other kinds of forecasts that we see in the future. The base of the ABC plan and the base of Brazilian tropical agriculture are the integrated agricultural model. This is based on Brazilian can produce 3 crops in the same area. So this is how it works today. We have the first crop is the main crop. We have the second crop, which is the summer crop, and we can do a third crop with pastures. That this is a reality that is an integrated model. We can increase production, reduce emission, and also reduce the pressure for open new areas. ABC plan in the last 10 years is promoting 6 main technologies: not tilling, recover degraded pasture, integrated livestock pasture and forestry, no-till farming, planted forest, biological nitrogen fixation, and waste treat animals. We had a first target of 35 million hectares that would use one of these technology, but instead, from 2010 to 2018, we had 52 million hectares of areas that utilize one of these 6 technologies and improve their quality, improve their sustainable quality. This is an area compared to Germany. So what is very interesting from this ABC plan, and also interesting about tropical agriculture, is that we can have scalability. We could recover an area compared to Germany that nowadays is using sustainable technologies. And these are very important for Brazil because we are a continental country and we need scalability and technology to recover our degraded pasture or degraded area into a more sustainable, resilience, and low carbon agriculture production. This is as a photography of Brazil in 2010, and these red points, this red area were degraded pastures. And in 2018, we had this reality, this picture. We see that we are able to recover the degraded pasture into more sustainable production systems, and this is based on our policy and based on tropical technologies. And from that area that I mentioned of 52 million hectares of area that started to use more sustainable technology, 26 million was just recovery of degraded pasture. And when we're talking about new agriculture frontier, where and how Brazilian agriculture will be able to supply the society in the future, the growing population in the future, where are our new agriculture frontier? First, we have 26% of our pastures in a severe degradation stage. Second, we have 31% of all our pastures in a mild degradation stage. And we have 43% in a good stage, but we still have 98 million hectares of degraded pastures that are able to intensify and to be much more productive. And so that's the new frontier where we can achieve the demand for future generation with the area that are already open. This is just a kind of example to show to you the difference in kind of technological model. In the left, we have a degraded pasture where we can have 1 head per hectare of production. And the right side, we have a very good pasture, a very good intensified pasture, keeping carbon on soil and having a low carbon production. And we can have 5 head hectares. So here is our new frontier, where we are putting our efforts, promoting investments to have this kind of reality. And what is interesting is this area in the right side where we can product 5 times more than the left side. We also have the low carbon meat. This is a certification, a Brazilian certification. That's a science-based certification that we are able to produce low carbon meat in these kind of situations. So this is a very important contribution for tackle climate change. And this is another reality from tropical agriculture that Brazil is promoting, is forest, pasture, that we have neutron beef production. And here we have another certification from Brazil that is the low carbon, the neutron carbon beef. So Brazil is mainly, I think, one of the few countries, few countries in the world that are able to produce a neutron carbon beef through the use of sustainable tropical technologies. And this is one of our priorities. We are promoting investments to boost this kind of technologies. We recently signed a partnership with Climate Bonds Initiative, which I think you might know about this Climate Bonds Initiative, which tries to promote and to boost sustainable investment. And this is a kind of example where this private money and private investment could promote and could boost. The second thing I'd like to talk to you is about our environmental compliance and environmental transparency. Brazil has the Forest Code, which is a very, very rigid legislation that oblige all the countries to, all the farmers to have a preservation. And also the Forest Code create the Rural Environmental Register, which is the core, which is our register that brings transparency in a public data, as we're gonna see further. This legislation is our environmental compliance and also our strategy to promote environmental conservation in rural properties, bringing transparency and traceability. So the Forest Code oblige farmers to protect 20% to 80% of their properties with native vegetation depending on the biome, and also promoted sustainable landscape management. Here in the right side is a kind of SketchUp for you to see or for you to understand a property under the under the Forest Code, the legislation. They have in this gray area the productive area, and the green area the areas that have to be preserved. Permanent areas, legal reserve, and also other kinds of protection. And this is our CAR, this environmental register platform, is a public platform that brings transparency. Everyone in the whole world with internet can have access to this information. Is a public platform. We have 6 million properties and 600 million hectares of areas under this register. And here we are having a zoom in a specific country, specific states, Tocantins. We can go under a municipality stage, and we can have access to individual farmers. Here is a farm in the Tocantins. The register is an active register, and you can have access to the area. And if we go further, we can have a public report of the situation of this farmer according to the legislation. And this is, I don't know about another situation with that in the whole world. Is the unique public report of environmental compliance that we've seen in the rural areas. So this is through the implementation of this legislation, Brazil will be able to have a huge transparency and able to have traceability in a very, very interesting situation. I would like to touch in Amazon biome because it's a very sensitive issue, and I think I need to bring some ideas of how we are dealing with that. As you may know, Brazilian Amazon biome, the rainforest region, occurs for more than 400 million hectares, is about 15% of the Brazilian territory. and is almost the size of the European territory. This area is covered with 84% of native vegetation. So we have almost the size of Europe in this region, is still covered with native vegetation. And from this area, around 60% is public lands. And this public land is a very challenging situation for Brazilian government to tackle illegality. We still have 20% of this region that is non-designated land, is land that has no owner, so it's no one's land. And this non-designated land, non-title land, is where most of the deforestation happen and most of the illegality, land grabbing, and all this kind of illegality happen. So when we see Brazil reality regarding deforestation, is a very important issue, but it is not connected to agriculture. It's much more connected to an issue of land grabbing, an issue of land occupation and land public land robbery. So it's a challenge that Brazil needs to face, but it's not connected to agriculture. It's much more connected to a land management issue and a necessity of land regularization and destination of public lands. This is a kind of, I mentioned before that we are focused on land management, and we are promoting land regularization in Amazon. Here is a situation in settlement, in land reform settlements, and we see that the settlements that has not been titled, that had not been officialized, they have a much more rates of deforestation than those that has the final titles. So for us in the Ministry of Agriculture, to give the title and to have land regularization is a very important strategy to tackle illegality and to tackle land grabbing and illegal deforestation. So those 4 pillars that I presented before is the basis of our strategy to achieve Paris Agreement. As you may know, we have 37% of greenhouse gas emission reduction in 2015, 43% of greenhouse gas emission reduction in 2030, and we do have a target of carbon neutrality target in 2050. Agriculture main contribution for Brazilian NDC is the forest code implementation that I presented for you before, the increase to 80% of biofuels using energy matrix, 2,000 million hectares of forest restoration. This is a target that will occur in the consequence of the forest code implementation, will be the major forest restoration as we have never seen before. 2,000 million hectares is larger than our sugarcane production in Brazil. So will be a huge forest restoration, and will happen to Brazil to achieve that Paris Agreement target, and also to increasing 15 million hectares degraded pasture restoration. So when we see long-term trend of our four pillars, we are focused to increasing 4% the increase in food, fiber, and biofuels production with a reduction of greenhouse gas emission, and also achieving carbon neutrality in 2015. So thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this initiative, and I hope that I could give to you a little bit of our overview, a little bit of our strategic agenda. I am the social environmental advisor from the Ministry of Agriculture, so I'm responsible to coordinate and to articulate this sustainable agenda. So I hope that brings a little bit of what are you doing, and also to present to you the great potential that we have to be a low carbon agriculture, or even a neutral carbon agriculture supplier. But we need support, we need investments, and we need strategy, and we need partnership. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jerome, for this presentation. It was really detailed and on point, and I think congratulations to the work that you're doing on MAPA. I think that for a lot of people nobody is really aware of those numbers and the improvement that's been happening in the last 10 years. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today. So I would like to continue the discussion on global challenges and sustainable agriculture. I'd like to invite our next panelists today, the speakers for our next panel of the day. That is the Global Challenges for Sustainable Agriculture. So Andrea Gadeia, Principal Economist at Export Development Canada, who will be moderating the discussion. Juliana Assunção, Director at Climate Policy Initiative. André Guimarães, Executive Director at IPAM, Instituto de Pesquisa Ambiental da Amazônia. And Inácio Gavilan, Director of Sustainability at Consumer Goods Forum, speaking directly from France. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. And I will leave it to you guys. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Carolina, and to the BCCC for having me, and to our audience for tuning into what I expect to be a very interesting discussion on the global challenges to sustainable agriculture, while bringing a particular focus on Brazil. So as Dulce rightly noted, climate change and ESG has substantially escalated in importance within the global agriculture discourse. And this is in the face of population growth, of food security concerns, and shifting consumer demands, making sustainable agriculture all the more pertinent. No matter how you look at it in the data, the global agriculture sector is a contributing factor in rising carbon emissions. Some are unavoidable, but others can be addressed through sustainable agriculture practices. And Canadian and Brazilian companies are confronted with the needs of the agriculture sustainability agenda differently, but the opportunities are significant for both. Each bring their expertise and capacity to the global market in support of better agriculture practices and increase the opportunities for producers in both countries. In Canada, the challenges are around water use, soil quality, and affordable food. Those are really top of mind. As for Brazil, particularly as of recent, again, unfortunately, is the country's really struggling to shake the perceptions related to deforestation and the links to agriculture, as well as address concerns that the Amazon biome is facing increased destruction. But as explained by Joao's excellent presentation, there's also a lot more to the issue, and it's important to separate out the noise and drill down to the cause and effect of what's really happening in Brazil's agriculture sector. And during this webinar, we'll explore this topic more in detail with a stellar panel, each bringing their expertise to the table. Now let's get started. So I'd like to invite each of our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves, and then shortly after that, allow me the opportunity to ask them each a question before we turn it over to audience questions. And so in the meantime, I encourage the audience to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll work to address as many of them as possible in the time that we have. So today we have the pleasure, as Carolina mentioned, of welcoming Juliano from the Director of Climate Policy Initiative, André from the IPAN Institute, and Ignacio from the Consumer Goods Forum. And so very briefly, if I could ask each of you to provide a short introduction of your organization and a sense of what sustainable agriculture means to that organization. Juliano, I'll ask you to go first, followed by André and Ignacio. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Let me start by thanking everyone for the opportunity to be here. It's a real pleasure and it's great discussion. Well, my name is Juliano Assunção. I'm a professor of economics at the Catholic University of Rio and also an executive director of the Climate Policy Initiative. And for us, sustainable agriculture is a way of addressing two of the key global challenges ahead, which is exactly food security and climate change. But this is at the global scale. At the national scale, in particularly for Brazil, I think sustainable agriculture, as Jerome clear in his presentation, is a huge opportunity for the country.
Thank you, Juliano. André, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much for the BCCC for inviting me here for this discussion. It's really an honor and extremely important to talk about land use and talk about solutions for the future generations. So I really appreciate. My name is André Marais, as indicated. I'm the executive director of EPAM. EPAM is the Amazonian Environmental Research Institute, a Brazilian think tank that has been around for about 26 years, trying to understand the dynamics between human activities and forest conservation, initially in the Amazon, when we began our operations back in 1995. And since about 12, 13 years, we've been also working in the Cerrado, trying to, once again, understand these dynamics and producing scientific information that would help drive decision-making processes in our country. Great to be here.
Thank you, Andre. And Ignacio, last but not least.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Dulce, for the invitation and to all the organizers. And it's a pleasure to be with my fellow panelists. So my name is Ignacio. I lead sustainability for a platform called the Consumer Goods Forum. So this is an organization that brings together retailers and manufacturers from across the world, 400 of them. The three things you will need to remember is that it's CEO-led. So the CEOs are the members of the organization, and it's focused on positive change through collective action. So think about your Walmarts, your Loblaws, your McCain's, Unilever, Kellogg's, Danone, coming together for those problems that individually cannot be solved, such as deforestation or food waste or plastics. When it comes to your question about sustainable agriculture, I think the global demand, and we've seen that from the members, the global demand for responsible agricultural production is one of the signs that consumers are changing how they buy food, and we want to help companies to achieve and increase food production more efficiently and obviously grounded in sustainable action.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ignacio, and thank you all for your introductions. We'll be pulling on a few strings just from your introductions already, but if I may take advantage of your knowledge and kick off the conversation with a few questions of my own. And so I'm going to start with Juliano, and I'd like to start with you to really set the stage from a global perspective when it comes to sustainable agriculture. What are the key trends in sustainable agriculture on the global stage, and specifically with land use and change, including deforestation that's come up a few times, being so top of mind for governments and climate pundits? How will agriculture development and deforestation intersect in this context?
Right, thank you, Andre. If I may, I'd like to show two pictures that I think illustrate quite well this thing. I'm not sure if you're, probably you can see my screen, right? And I really like these pictures to show what's going on with this relationship between agricultural development and deforestation, or the expansion of land, if you look at the other side of it. And what's interesting about these two graphs is the fact that the graph on your left, it's a kind of a boring graph in which it shows that the world has managed to increase its production in a quite steadily basis for a long time, since 1961 up to 2016, according to the FAO data. And nothing really exciting is going on there. But if you look at what's going on, in the way that we are producing, in the way that this production is taking, and how it's taking place, on the graph on your right, you see something that is pretty interesting if you think about the relationship between agriculture development and deforestation. That is quite close to what João presented before. You can see that from 1961 up to 2001, the world has managed to increase its agricultural production through a combination of land expansion in the horizontal axis and productivity gains in the vertical axis, right? But something happened, or a process, or a combination of factors has determined a dramatic shift in this trend. And from 2001, if anything, the world has been managed to produce more with less land, right? Which is a remarkable starting point that shows that the idea of producing more with existing land is much more than a theoretical possibility. It's something that is taking place at the global scale for a long time, right? And just to finalize, I'd like to show a different map of Brazil. And I'd like to excuse my Gaúcho friends because we put the buildings on top of their heads. But this graph shows what Jerome was elaborating before, which is this idea that the country has not only a lot of remaining forests, but also, maybe more importantly, if you think about food security and climate change, you see there is a lot of land, in the form of pastures that is being underused in Brazil. And actually, we have many studies at CPI in which you look at, on the one hand, a big shift in agriculture productivity, in modernization of agriculture, and all of the stories that we created evidence, we recovered the fact that modern agriculture, at least in Brazil, has much more to do with converting pasture into cropland rather than deforestation. And actually, those areas in which modern agriculture is happening with in a more intense way are the areas in which you observe less pressure for deforestation. And then, on the other hand, if you look at the implementation of the policies that were dealing with deforestation after 2004 onwards, we see that those policies were quite effective with dealing with deforestation up to 2012, but they had no impact on agriculture production. So this relationship between agricultural development and deforestation in Brazil is far from being a trade-off. And actually, what you see is this synergic kind of relationship between modern agriculture and forest, which I think it's interesting. And this sets the scene to me for the government to discuss what are the policies that we have in place in order to deal with deforestation, which is a urgent topic in the country, especially given what we've been experiencing in the last years. And at the same time, creating enabling conditions for developing agriculture and increasing productivity in the existing lands. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliano. It's very interesting to see that connection, as demonstrated by João as well, that the connection between deforestation somewhat stalling, but productivity increasing, and breaking that link between having to change land use in order to increase agriculture. I did want to pull on the string of deforestation, however, just given how much of it is in the public discourse and in the media, particularly over the last few years. And I'd like to bring in Andre for this question to elaborate a little bit more on how you would characterize what is going on in the Amazon and the Cerrado. How would you frame Brazil within this context of sustainable agriculture while having this reputation of high levels of deforestation and what that could be doing to the biomes?
Thank you, Andrea. How many hours I have to answer that question? Just kidding. I'm trying to do.
Keep going. I'm sure we've got lots of time.
I'll try to squeeze that in a few minutes, but thank you very much for the question, Andrea. Let me first, before talking about specifically the Amazon and deforestation and Cerrado and so on, put Brazil a little bit in perspective. I think it's important to say that, Brazil is, needless to say, is an agricultural powerhouse, right? As João Adrien, my good friend, said, it has a tremendous responsibility in terms of global food security, on one hand. On the other hand, it's also an environmental powerhouse because it has, it's the home for the Amazon, or most of the Amazon. It's the home for the Cerrado. It's the home for the Pantanal. It's the home for, 1 in every 5 solutions that life has found to over 3 billion years, to occupy this planet. So Brazil has an enormous responsibility to keep feeding the world on one hand, and to make sure that this is done on a sustainable way. We can't continue the process, just as Juliano pointed of our agricultural development at the expense of our forests. That process has to change. And I would even say that, a new paradigm has to arrive. I like to say that we are living through the expansionist paradigm. We've been expanding. The agricultural history in Brazil is a success story. We've shifted from a net importer of food 50 years ago to be one of the largest producers and exporters of food over in a few decades. And this is a tremendous success story, but that has happened at the expense of half of the Cerrado and 20% of the Amazon. That process can't continue that way. We need to intensify. We need to redesign the incentives to stop and revert that process. That's the challenge that we have ahead. I fully agree with what Jerome said in terms of the responsibility for the deforestation. Half of the deforestation in the Amazon, Andrea, takes place in public lands. And this is happening because of grileiros, land grabbers. This is happening because of illegal loggers. This is happening because of criminals. These are not farmers. These are not ranchers. These are not folks producing food. You know, of course, at some point in the future, these lands are going to go into production because they're going to be sold and so on. But the main causers of this process are criminals. So I think the challenge that we have ahead is, once again, on one hand, to make it compatible or to make it harmonic, you know, production and conservation on one hand. And on the other hand, join forces between the agribusiness sector, NGOs, academia, different levels of the government to fight illegality. That's the challenge that we have in front of us. Most of the deforestation in the Amazon, actually, the number is above 90%. 90% of the deforestation in the Amazon is at some extent illegal. Right? Most of it is criminal, but a substantial portion is illegal. So we have to find ways to create the right incentives to keep forests standing. Payment for environmental services, carbon markets, all of those mechanisms and instruments are still in its infancy. But I see a tremendous opportunity for Brazil and other countries to benefit from the demand that the world has now to mitigate climate change, for instance. You know, the Amazon alone stores, and that's not just Brazil, but the entire watershed, it stores the equivalent to 10 years of global human emissions of carbon. So that's an enormous, once again, storage of carbon that needs to be kept there as a storage. So I don't want to extend too much, Andrea. This is, of course, a subject that we can go in many, many different directions. But I just wanted to finalize in one sentence what I mean by these few words is that we need to shift from a land rush, as Juliana was saying, into a forest rush. And in order to do that, we need to change the position of the incentives, the financial incentives, the political incentives and messages to go the other direction. That's necessary. 90% of our agriculture depends on water, on rain. And the closest thing we have from a factory of water is the Amazon. We have to keep that standing. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more, Andre. Like, I'm appreciative that you bring in the aspect of the illegality that's contributing to the challenges, not only in the Amazon, but also in the Cerrado. And so thank you for highlighting that. But I wanted to touch on this last comment about incentives and really working in partnership with all the stakeholders involved. And so this is where I'm going to bring in Ignacio to really talk about your expertise on how is it that companies are approaching this issue of sustainable agriculture in Brazil and taking this context into consideration.
Yep, perfect. Thank you. So let me give you a bit of an overview from the outside, because most of our companies are headquartered either in the US, Canada, or Central Europe. So how we look at Brazil and how we tackle this issue. Rule number one that we learn is that it's the concept of neocolonialism. You don't go there as a foreign company to teach them how to do things. You partner with Brazilian companies to do things in Brazil done by Brazilians. That works far better than anything else. When you go and try to inject something, doesn't work that well. But anyway, so from outside Brazil, consumers are beginning to understand how agriculture works in Brazil. So there's a contrast between two different approaches to agriculture that have shaped the history of Brazil. One is the being the largest agricultural exporter. Obviously, you have large-scale operation for soy, for sugar, for coffee. It is the largest beef exporter, as we've heard today. These operations are usually monocultures that rely on fertilizers, heavy machinery, etc., etc. Most often very large properties, thousands of hectares. It is therefore highly specialized, competitive, profit and export oriented. It's a wonderful agricultural sector, but we need to fix the things that we've heard today that needs to be fixed. on the other side of the spectrum, you have small-scale agroecological subsistence farming that is now becoming very trendy. It's focused on local production and consumption, but the demand for this sort of product is growing quickly in the US, in the European Union, Canada, I guess, as well. Smallholder begins to have international value because you can trace it back, because it has a number of, of course, organic benefits, etc., etc. So obviously the average consumer gets information from various sources. I'm not going to talk about here fake news, but you all know what happens when we all as consumers get news from different angles. So over the past years, it's been mainly around the country being associated with deforestation, abuse of pesticides, and neglecting some of the environmental agenda items. And this came out in the Mercosur EU agreement and in many other instances. So from the company point of view, one thing we've been doing is creating a roadmap. So a number of companies within the CGF has created a coalition. It has a roadmap that outlines the steps that members will take in the next few years in 5 areas, focusing on own operations, supplier and trader engagement, management and monitoring of high-risk regions, and then what we call engagement in landscapes and regions. All of this needs to have the umbrella of incredible transparency and accountability. So this is how we organize a number of companies to really work on deforestation. There's a number of key action. All of this is on our webpage at the Consumer Goods Forum, and it's been a number of years working on things like certification, which is okay, but is not the comprehensive tool we thought it was going to be. We've been working directly with producers. There's progress, and there's a lot of hope, and there's a lot of energy from companies to get this right.
And it's interesting you end on that note, Ignacio, as we already have a question coming in, somewhat touching on a few pieces that everyone's spoken to, and this issue of deforestation and the perception as well that policymakers may not be as committed, and it may change depending on who is in office, and where is the political will to put forward the best effort. But given that the discourse around this issue has really evolved over the last few years, how are Brazilian companies potentially starting to use their influence on this topic to try and fill some of those gaps, whether it be policy, institution, or regulatory? And is there a potential to change the higher level tone on this issue? And so I'll throw it out to Juliano first, but invite anyone else on the panel afterwards to chime in as well.
Thanks, Andrea. Well, to me, the discussion about deforestation comes from the interaction of 3 different forces. We have what we've been discussing so far, which is the agricultural dynamics and its relationship with demand for new areas. On the other hand, we have a set of policy tools. In Brazil, we've been developing quite interesting, innovative instruments, especially those that use satellite imagery as a basis for monitoring and law enforcement since 2004. And then the third pillar is the political will of using those tools in order to tackle deforestation, right? So I see deforestation in Brazil, based on everything that has been said before, as a big waste. It's a waste of resources, and we don't need areas in order to increase our agriculture. And actually, if you look at the data, about 1/4 of the total deforested area in the Amazon is in some form of regeneration, which means that you basically cut those trees for nothing, right? And that those areas were abandoned and they are regrowing, which is good for some aspect of the problem, but it gives this impression of a big waste. So what's the role of companies and firms? To me, I think the companies, they can create a political environment that will support, especially those that are making those decisions, whether or not to use those policy tools in order to deal with deforestation, to face the right trade-offs between deforestation and agriculture. Right? Even in a situation which, as Jerome pointed out, and I pretty much agree with him, even in a situation which agriculture in Brazil is not directly associated with deforestation, I see that the sector as well as the companies, they might play an important role of pressing the government to deal with deforestation in the way it should be, in the way that it can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we started to see coming out of, a company like JBS, the largest meat producer in the world, of looking at how do we bring in data into the supply management to ensure that some of the issues surrounding the misuse of land or some of the illegality could also be addressed. So certainly a long way to go, but I think it does begin with at least making that declaration. And I wanted to pull on that string as well on the topic of illegality. As Andre mentioned earlier, it's a significant proportion of what's been happening in the biomes mentioned. And so I was wondering if you could touch on a little bit on that topic and maybe give a bit more or a bit better sense of how that's impacting the agriculture sector, the perceptions, as we saw in the polls coming from the audience. I mean, the perception from our audience, at least, is I would say that about 25% of viewers in our audience believe that agriculture products are not sustainable out of Brazil. And so I think these are issues of potential perception, but also really understanding some of the challenges in Brazil. So Andre, your views on this illegality, and how does the whole spectrum of stakeholders try to work on that issue to improve those perceptions?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andrea. Let me roll back the movie to the first decade of the 2000s. Between 2003 and 2012, we were able to drop the deforestation in the Amazon by 80%. We reached the lowest level ever in the deforestation per year in 2012 in the Amazon. At the same time, in the same region, the beef production has doubled and the soybean production has doubled. So there is, first of all, a few messages come from that process. First of all, this connection between expanding the frontier and increasing production, I mean, that paradigm doesn't hold anymore. So that doesn't make any sense. And why did that happen, Andrea? For a number of reasons. Basically, command and control. Also, some decisions from the financial sector not to provide credit lines, for example, for illegal operations in the Amazon. So it was a combination of factors that led us to that process. What did we miss? Because since 2012, 2014, 2013, the deforestation started climbing again. So we keep saying that the 2 last years were the worst one. Yes, indeed, they were the worst one. But the process started, 7, 8, 9 years ago, the process of, this continuous deforestation process reaching now 12,000 kilometers in the Amazon per year. So what did we miss, 8, 9, 10 years ago in order to make that process a more continuous process? I think it's in general, it's political will. More specifically, I think we miss the incentives. Command and control alone is not going to fix the problem. It's expensive, right? It's unsustainable because it has political nuances there that you have to deal with. But what is sustainable is a new model of economic development. And a new model of economic development needs necessarily right incentives. So, for instance, we have in Brazil the Plano Safra. Plano Safra is a major pot of money that goes into agriculture every year. It's somewhere between 40 and 50 billion dollars a year that provides, taxpayers' money that provides credit lines for agriculture around across the country. And up until now, actually, because of Juliano here, until last year, there was not a single requirement in the forest code or incentive in the forest in the Plano Safra for compliance with the forest code. So if I'm a farmer completely illegal, right, I'm gonna get the same interest rate as my next door colleague that is in compliance with the forest code. That is just the beginning of a process. We still have a long way to go, but I think to cut a long story short, Andrea, I think the challenge is to convert political will. That it fluctuates by nature, but convert that political will into, on one hand, command and control, effective command and control associated with the right incentives. And then we start making the profound and more sustainable changes towards less deforestation in the Amazon and across the country.
I couldn't agree more, Andre. I think in general, a blend of carrot and stick is more often than not a much more effective way of addressing an issue. But as you just did, I'm going to pull Giuliano into this as well, given your experience and your expertise in this area. Giuliano, could you elaborate a little bit more on how the financial industry is supporting some of these initiatives and how it can help in that implementation of the Forest Code, which we'll get into a little bit afterwards as well.
Right, sure. Well, I think, first of all, I think the financial sector has a lot to contribute for this whole agenda for two reasons. First, they affect the whole economy, right? I think it's quite pervasive, and it operates at the scale that the challenge required operates as well. So that's a first reason. The second reason is that because they are by nature intermediaries, they are not directly exposed to the costs and benefits associated with those decisions. I think they are in a much better position in order to make things change. And they have some track record on that. If you look at all the improvements on the governance that we observed since the Enron scandal, financial sector has been quite instrumental in implementing those things. So I think their arrival on this agenda is quite welcome, and it has to be celebrated. If you look at the topics that Andre introduced, in particularly the fact that in Brazil we've been channeling some taxpayer resources for the sector for a long time, and we did it for a reason. If you look nowadays, this rationale might no longer apply for the sector that is growing, it's pretty active, and so on and so forth. So I think there is a whole spectrum of initiatives that has to do with a better alignment between the allocation of public funds and the provision of public goods. And here, environmental services and implementation of the Forest Code in particular is something that is quite concrete and tangible and important. I think that's a long road ahead in order to provide a better alignment of these two key instruments and two main policies. And to me, both policies and both sides can benefit from it. On the one hand, the implementation of Forest Code is quite challenging in many dimensions, and it will require some incentives and resources. And on the other hand, I think having a rural credit closer to the implementation of Forest Code will provide the agricultural sector a better rationale for the allocation of budgets that they can claim into the political negotiation. So I see this alignment as something that is quite necessary. And luckily enough, the Central Bank has announced last year a huge step towards that direction. So they launched what they call the sustainability dimension of their institutional agenda, in which it's going to pave the road to promote this alignment between the allocation of public funds and the environmental agenda, in which Forest Code is probably one of the key issues there. So I think we are, we have some quite promising ideas that have been set more recently.
that's quite promising, and to see the evolution. But while there are still some challenges, as you mentioned, in that connectivity between the code and what happens in reality and what is the current context, I think it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. I wanted to bring in Ignacio just to talk about this topic of incentives and anything that could come up from your membership on what are maybe some incentives that could be explored to further develop sustainable agriculture partnerships or activity in Brazil.
Well, it's a tricky, together with the P word that we call the premium, is something that is very difficult for companies to talk. I cannot give you a sort of one solution because members are divided with this topic. Overall, I think there's best of intentions to really get into the ground and help Brazilian farmers with this, which 10 years ago it was a bit more distant and based on certification. Right now, many of the members are getting into the specifics of initiatives such as the Produce Protect include in Mato Grosso. So you have names of companies working in there to then make sure that they work on the transparency to get the product back. So I think incentive rather than financial, which I fully agree with Andrea, you need to have, it'll be a bit perverse if we see the private sector paying directly for that. It's taking the role of government, it's taking the role of someone else. If just the private sector pays for that, you start creating islands of excellence, but you don't fix the problem at a scale. So the private sector will contribute to large funds that work with farmers, but I think the feeling is I don't want to be the only one solving this, as if it was only my responsibility. So it's a mix of collaboration again with governments, ideally local governments, states rather than federal, because it gets much faster. But I think companies overall are willing to be part of the solution, not by just throwing money at the issue, but by collaborating proactively with universities, with town halls, with mayors, with the state itself.
No, I appreciate that, and very much like in Canada as a federal system, you know, most of the provinces is where really it can have a huge impact on how the agriculture sector is managed. Similarly in Brazil, and a quick plug in Brazil, as you mentioned, the academics. I mean, the research coming out of Brazil, the data is actually far beyond what most agriculture producers actually publish. And so I encourage folks to, I think it's Terra Brasilia is one of the great sites where you could see a lot of interesting data, and a few others that were mentioned by Joao. And so there's a lot going on in Brazil to try and put that information out there. But ultimately, those partnerships working together with the various stakeholders is what really makes a difference, and very much keeping Ignacio's comment for one of his first comments in mind is that it's in partnership and not necessarily I'm coming in to do the job versus let's do this together and try to build that capacity, because you know Brazil is a highly innovative country when it comes to agriculture. I did for the last few minutes that we have, I did want to touch on the forest code because it's come up a number of times throughout the discussions. We asked our audience members a few poll questions whether they were familiar with the forest code, and about 60% were not, and also about 60% had the impression that it was not being implemented appropriately by main actors. And so I'm going to throw out a reactions question to our panel before we close off on final statements. And so we'll start with Ignacio. What are your views on that poll result?
Somehow expected. If you're not too close to the issue, you don't know. But it's sad that being one of the best legislative pieces in the world when it comes to conservation, and again, Produce Protect is not just conservation; is conservation with production. Is not so well known. which is sad. I think there's a job to be done in there. If you really enforce all the regulations and measures that are in place through the forest code, and as Joao pointed out, you get the properties registered and the landowners recognized as such, including their environmental responsibilities with the Reserva Legal, with the buffer zones, that will make a huge difference. That will be a game changer. That'll be my view. And most of the members have studied the code, have worked with all the local authorities to implement. So I think it's well known in the deforestation world, but I think it needs to be transmitted somehow and taking opportunities like COP26 now. I think Brazil has done an incredible job drafting it. It's not perfect, but is probably one of the best codes you have, especially in forested countries.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And Giuliano has just offered all the attendees a link to an overview of that code. So do take a look. It's actually quite comprehensive. Giuliano, any last words on the forest code? And then I'll invite Andrea as well.
Yes, sure. I think the forest code is fascinating for many reasons, and it's far beyond a piece to protect remaining forests, because the fact that it establishes that every farm in the country has some constraints in terms of the area, the forest code creates an environment to promote yield gains rather than area expansion. So, much more than having a piece of protecting the existing environment, it's also a way of promoting modern agriculture and that improvements in the sector that has more to do with productivity gains rather than area expansion. So I think the forest code is a tool quite important to promote sustainable agriculture and modern agriculture in Brazil.
Thank you, Giuliano. Definitely something we can do here in Canada is try to promote the forest code and try to get a little bit more information out there for our Canadian partners here in Canada. Andre, any last minute forestry code comments?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Giuliano and Inácio here. I mean, the forest code is a beautiful legislative piece. I mean, it basically combines or harmonizes conservation and production and makes sure that these things are interconnected. And let me just tell a quick story, Andrea. There's a former minister of agriculture in Brazil and a good friend of IPAM. You know, we stimulates a lot of work, a good friend of mine personally and so on. But he used to say that the forest code is like having a hotel with 10 stores and you can only use 5 of them to rent. The other 5 you have to keep, maintain, but you can't make a profit out of it. I couldn't disagree more with this former minister, because in keeping those additional 5 storages, you are keeping the capacity of the other ones to continue being rented. So you need that storage, you need that those forests to produce the water, to produce the biological control, to produce the conditions, to assure the conditions of the future of agriculture. As I said before, 90% and more of our agriculture is not irrigated. We depend upon water cycles, which are promoted by the forests. And 1 tree in the Amazon pumps up to the atmosphere 500 liters of water a day. So keeping those forests standing inside private properties included is necessary, and that's what the forest code stands for. So I really dream for the day, Andrea, in which the farmers and ranchers in Brazil will all see the forest code as an asset, not as a burden as they see today.
Absolutely. I think we've gotten a few key points throughout this discussion. Is one, partnerships and working all together through this, being aware of what's already out there and making those connections with, for example, the forest code credit, so on and so forth. But really, it's about kind of getting that story out there and getting the information out there so that it becomes more common knowledge and folks can leverage it for their benefit, for Canadian companies, for Brazilian companies. We're about to close off. I will give, if anyone has any very last minute high level views that they would like to leave our audience with, if you would be remiss if they left without this knowledge. I will give you each a few seconds. Andre, any last minute views to leave our audience?
Just a big thank you, Andrea. And you know, the hope that I have is that we can work together. We are in the middle of a paradigm shift, as I said, and that's the right moment for countries, companies, NGOs, you know, academia, consumers, you know, voters to work together towards a different, I wouldn't say a better or worse, but a different future. We need to change, and we need to change together. So it's the time of cooperation. That's what I expect. Thank you so much for inviting me here.
Thank you, Andre. Cooperation and evolution. I like that. Giuliano, any last minute words?
Well, let's just thank you all again for the opportunity of being here. It's been great. And I'd like to echo what Andrea just said. I think that, you know, we are dealing with some real challenge that will require cooperation, coordination, and real work that is pretty far from our political discussions that are pretty naive and so on. But I'm pretty optimistic that will, as in other contexts we've been nailed in this challenge, I think for this particular one, it will be no different. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Optimism. We're going to carry that through. And last but not least, Ignacio.
Always difficult to be the last one. Couldn't agree more. Number one, with a thank you to all of you. This is a fantastic panel. And then with the content, of course. I think from the private sector, consumer goods companies perspective, we want to unlock the resistance to change. If we can help in any way, we will do it. We want to bring positive change. The process is difficult, but as we say, you know, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So we could have some fun on the way to making production fully sustainable. Thank you very much again.
Wonderful. Thank you. A big thank you to Andrea, Giuliano, and Ignacio. And thank you back to you, Carolina. I hope our audience enjoyed that discussion.
Thank you so much, Andrea, Giuliano, Andrea, and Ignacio for the presentation and also for bringing these challenges and issues that needed to be discussed and also clarified. So thank you so much. I now would like to introduce the panelists of our next panel entitled Agriculture and Biodiversity Success Stories. So it's a pleasure to introduce Karina Pimenta, Executive Director at Conexus, Beto Mesquita, Director Policy and Institutional Relations at BV Rio, Pedro Ronca, Manager at Cocoa Action, and Paula Saad, President at Mandala Group. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for introducing us, and thank you all, the Canada Chamber, for inviting us to be here. I have the honor to introduce this panel to talk about the success cases that we have in the Amazon and entrepreneurial initiatives, businesses, and sector approaches that are trying to develop an economic approach to what we have discussed in the previous panel. How do we grow an economy of forests and a bioeconomy that conserves forests but have economic development, is competitive, and can access markets nationally and internationally. So I think there's an excellent panel of very different models that we will see in the Amazon. And just to give you a brief overview, we have, when we talk about economics of the Amazon, we look at the forest and say how much we can generate of value through forest, through conservation, through regenerative economy. And recently there was a study published that stated that over the market of $176 billion in forest markets internationally, Brazil has only 0.2% of participation. And I think this shows how difficult it is for us still to develop this economy. And we are at the early stages of finding the channels, the right incentives, and the right mechanisms to create a more dynamic economic environment there. But there is a lot of action going on. So I think the three cases here will show different aspects of how entrepreneurship is taking place in the Amazon. So I'll just take the first case on with Paola. she can introduce the case of Bertolini and Mandala Group in trying to build a bio-industrialization factory in the Amazon. Thank you, Paula.
So I would like to thank Ina and also thank my fellow panelists and the CCBC and the BCC for the invitation. My name is Paula Saad. I'm the president of Mandala Group. I do international business development for companies in Canada or Brazil or any other country. This is one of my passion projects. I started with this project in 2018, doing the international sort of market research for them. And so I'm very pleased that the project's still going on because many said it was impossible. So the project is by Bertolini. And it started with Mr. Bertolini saw some acai people, people in his land selling acai, and he asked them how they're going to sell it, and he realized how difficult it was for the Ribeirinhos, the riverside people, to sell that acai, and how long they have to go, especially taking consideration the acai is spoils in 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours. And they have to cover huge distances in the Amazon to do that. It's very different from the agriculture in Pará, where it's inland. This one is all by the river, and they have to go sometimes 10 more hours in the little boat to sell it for very little to middlemen. So looking at this, if you want to look at the picture, so the picture on the left is when I saw the barge at first in 2019, and that's what it looks now. And all on the side you're going to see are the solar panels that they are. So it's basically the size of it's 80 meters in length, about 17 meters in width, and 6 meters in height, and it's basically the size of about 3 basketball fields. It can process 12 tons of pulp a day, and store about 300 tons of pulp in the barge. So this is the insider look in the barge when you're first, and the following slide is what it looks like now. On the next slide, we see sustainability. We're going to see different aspects. The first one is the water treatment. So it's basically major filters from Israel that used in Africa by the UN to tap on rivers and make it potable water. And it is used for cleaning the fruit. Some of the water used in processed and refiltered. So there is a process of refiltering. In the barge, we have accommodations for up to 20 employees, 20 rooms and bathrooms and gym and kitchen and everything. So it's used for that as well. And then we also have an effluent waste treatment to return the water to the river. So basically the water is returned cleaner than when they actually pull the water. And they have 3 labs inside. One of them is microbial, the other one's chemical, and the third one as well. Also, on the community side, they actually have 2 big ice machines in the barge that are made to supply ice to the actually Ribeirinho populations for them to keep food and other uses, because apparently that's really important for them. Yes. So on the solar energy, this is a huge project that is actually being portrayed in different parts of the world as an energy project. It has 630, I believe, solar panels installed on the roof on the sides. The 84 batteries for energy storage. They are stored in the basement of the barge. And it is the largest off-grid solar energy generation and storage project in the world, which is apparently nothing like that had been done, which in this project, everything is very new and innovative, and that's why I guess it took such a long time to actually get all the installations and the right knowledge to build it in a sustainable way. People who know acai, they know that about 80% of the acai is pits. And so for a long time, we were wondering what we're going to do with all these pits in the barge. We're not going to throw them in the river. What can we do? Can we process them? Can we sell them after? Originally, half of the barge was only for storage of the pits. But then, we decided and looked and did research, and we got a boiler. And this boiler, where it does, the steam and the heat coming from the boiler used to clean the machines, it incinerates the acai pits and the solid waste. And this byproduct is actually becomes fertilizer that's given back to the communities for them to use. And the filter system they have guarantees the emission levels are controlled. On the next slide, we see the differential of the acai from Bertolini. Well, it's 100% extractive and native. It's not ER certified. The harvest is very different from the Pará harvest. It goes about 10 months a year because it keeps going up the river to the different regions. The communities, it's basically they map the rivers on the West Amazon. They are going to be part of the project. And those communities worked with our researchers and social, people there on the social community side of Bertolini, to map and help them and tell them what needs to be done for the sale to take place, what does Bertolini expect from them, and they also, so those become part of our rosters of communities and families that would sell to Bertolini. I think it's worth saying that we're putting in about $5 million reais, into the region, and just the buying acai, plus employing about 50 people. So there'll always be someone from the community that'll be working with us, plus the people that are working on the barge as well. So the pulp process to be processed in just mere hours, and so it cannot be more fresh. And also because the barrels or the containers they're going to have, we know exactly what community they got from, what person we bought it from. So there's traceability, which is not something that can be said for the other acai. Also, the acai from the Amazon is considered a premium quality acai. The species that he has is like a single acai, not the three other ones that are used in Pará. So that produces an acai that is dark in color, the largest seed. It's very high in antioxidant. It's less fatty and it has a stronger taste. And also the product can be made and delivered to the customer's expectations. So in the next slide, you just see just a few pictures of the barge actually went out last week. So these are some of the pictures they send us. The production line, and the picture on the right is really actually nice. I don't know if you can see it, but one of the Riverside people just waiting to see if the acai was approved. And he just parked his boat there. So on the next slide, you see some of the licenses that the boat, the barge, has. As you can imagine, it was a huge process with the, state and federal governments, and, to get the barge approved. I believe some laws and some parameters had to be changed to be able to launch this process. So we're very proud that we actually managed to get it out there, and that, we have all the licenses necessary. In terms of certifications, on the next slide, because for these certifications, we're going to have to certify the communities and the families, and not exactly the barge, the FAP. These are the ones we're looking at, and also we're looking for kosher and halal, and so we're going to be tackling one by one. And also we're looking for biodynamic, because this is the ones that we identified that we need in order to be competitive in the international market as well. And the sales will be only bulk. It will not be we're not going to have a final product for the client. I believe next, Carolina, please. Yeah, this is our contact. So I'm in the commercial side and a brand ambassador for the project. And thank you very much for your attention. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Paola. What I really like about your project is that you have to grow all this technology by yourselves, because at the moment in the Amazon, we are still struggling in developing this ecosystem of technology and support for initiatives like that to grow. And that touches upon one of the main sources of income for small producers and extractivist communities in the Amazon. The acai is responsible for 10,000s of people that live from this product. Is the dark gold for many of them. And the development of this industry has enabled them to increase income, the industry as a whole, but it also faces a lots of issues of how they will continue to be engaged in this. And I think this is the question for the whole Amazon, because many of the production of the acai is in that areas that we saw in the when we see the land use. They are in strategic reserves, they are in areas of conservation, of sustainable use conservations, and what Paola said, that we have to certify the origins and have all this careful management and handle of the products is very important to ensure that we have a traceable system. So I really like, I know how difficult it is to implement this kind of initiative from the ground in the Amazon, but I think we have to work on an ecosystem that can support that further. And before going to this kind of discussions, I would lead to the second panelist, which is Beto Mesquita. And I think it's very connected to the case that Paola presented, because he focuses on the community-led enterprises and indigenous people, the traditional people, and try to aggregate value, to generate value and high-level value for these target groups. And with that, help conservation and income and in the forests. So Beto, over to you.
Thank you, Karina. Let me share my presentation. First of all, I would like to extend a warm thanks to the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce for this invitation, and then for this tremendous opportunity to share in a nutshell some of our experience. Before talking about the initiatives themselves, let me just short introduction about Rio Institute. We are a no-profit society organization founded in 2011. Our mission, it's a quite different of the most common missions in the third sector's organizations, because we are engaged to develop and to promote market and financial solutions for many types of environmental assets. In this 10 years of operation, we have been developing platforms and tools for different publics, landowners, forest remnants, waste pickers in urban areas, local governments committed with environmental protection and also climate governance agendas, and other stakeholders. Our main targets in terms of topics are forests and land use, climate and circular economy. Our headquarters is in Rio de Janeiro City, but we also have some offices in Oxford, in Geneva, and representatives in São Paulo, Ghana, Indonesia, and also in some states of the Amazonia. Well, for today, I would like to share with you two initiatives that we are carrying out from the last years. One is the Rio Design and Sustainable Wood, and another one is Amazonia Ativa. Rio Design and Sustainable Wood started about 4 years ago when we held a workshop to discuss the challenges and the opportunities for the community forest management. And then it results in a visit in the Tapajós National Forest. And then together with many partners and donors, we started an initiative in a pilot project. This pilot project was held in Tapajós National Forest, which is a protected area in the heart of Amazon in the southwest region of Marais state, with more than 5,000 square kilometers, and where more than 9,000 people are living, and depends their livelihoods depends on the forest management, even of timber and non-timber products. About 10 years, 12 years ago, these communities founded a cooperative, a community cooperative, which called Conflona. It's a cooperativa mista da Floresta Nacional do Tapajós. And then they specialized in forest management, sustainable forest management. They got a FSC certification, forest certification, and then they becomes as a reference, a benchmark for the community forest management in the Amazonia. But even with the FSC label, even with this expertise that they have, they still selling logs with a low add value to the local markets. And then 5 years ago, they got a support to build a small furniture plant inside the Tapajós National Forest, owned and managed by the cooperative to produce furnitures and other objects made by wood, and not use the logs, but use the waste of the forest management. But they still selling furnitures to the regional market. So they harvest in a sustainable way, using applying sustainable management issues in the forest. They got a certification, international certification. They produce some furnitures, but they're still selling to the regional market with low add value. And in that point, we started with the Biome Design Sustainable Wood initiatives, because the idea was to invite the most important and the most famous designers in Brazil, people who are living in Brazil, producing in Brazil, except Roberto Campasso, which is living in London right now, but they have a presence in special markets for design, such as New York, Paris, and Milan. And then we invite these designers as volunteers to spend 2 or 3 days in the middle of the forest to help to teach the cooperatives, to teach the furniture guys in terms of to improve their skills, to improve their expertise in terms of new techniques, finishing issues, to design new types of furnitures or new type of objectives. So we promote 11 workshops. It is during the 2018, 2019 until February of the last year, when we stopped the activities because the COVID-19 pandemic. But this is some pictures that show the designers teaching inside the forest, in the furniture. And as a result of this partnership, it's not only the cooperative achieving more new skills and new techniques, but also it started a very powerful commercial and production partnership between some of the designers, which is participating in the project, and the cooperative. Now they are planning, the designers are drawing specific pieces, specific products, specific furnitures that was made in the furniture and was selling in this special, in high add value markets. Here it's, we also participate in some exhibition. These pictures, it's in the MADI, which is the most important fair, design fair in Latin America. It was almost 2 years ago. And all of this furniture was designed for one of the partners in the project, and was made with certified wood, managed, harvested for a cooperative, and produced, made in the furniture plant, the small furniture plant of the cooperative. Those pictures in the sun is part of the designers that are partner. And the second initiatives that I would like to share with you, it's Amazônia Ativa. Amazônia Ativa, it's an online, it's a platform that we developed. It was developed 2 years ago as a part of a climate governance project in the Rondônia state. It's a west state in Amazonia. And then right now we have more than 70 partners, 70 producers offering products in Amazônia Ativa. it is a kind of, it's joined an e-commerce tool with a kind of a virtual showroom. And for this year, we are started to implement more technological solutions for logistics, for finances, and for businesses innovation and businesses management for the partners. And the idea that we have to expand for more partners and to include other facilities and other applications that could be achieved to face the most important challenges for the bioeconomy in Amazonia region. We are also contributing for 10 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals for the United Nations. Amazonia Active is a kind of a connection between people, the forest, the people who's living there in the forest, and people and companies around the world interested to leverage transformational business and with social and environmental responsibility. We will also highlight we call it as a protagonists. We have some indigenous people, Afro-descendants communities, no-timber extractivists, small and medium entrepreneurs, family farming, and also some entrepreneurs led by women. Here are some, it is developed under PrestaShop platform to provide e-commerce of skills. And beyond products in Amazonia Ativa, we also offer a platform for those interested in environmental assets, such as carbon credits or environmental reserve quotas, different types of environmental easements. We already have some information about that in the site for the Rondônia state, and then we are expanding for the other states in Amazonia, in legal Amazonia. It covers the 9 states of, we call it the legal Amazonia because it includes the Amazonia biome and also other parts of the Brazil in the Cerrado, part of the north side of the Cerrado, which include in Amazonia, in the legal Amazonia. This is the amazoniativa.com, and then I will offer in the chat the link to the mini doc. It's about 17 minutes doc with subtitles in English on the Beverhill Design and Sustainable Wood Initiative. This is my context. Thanks again. Thanks a lot for Carolina, Dulce, Karina, and all the people from the Chamber of Commerce for this opportunity, and glad that it's available for the debates. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beto, for showing this variety of products and services that you are developing in the Amazon jointly with lots of communities. And I think this is another niche that we have in the Amazon to find this kind of income generation products with high added value that can offer services and connect to markets, both nationally and internationally. I think I wanted to hear from you, Beto, after about the challenges of making this happen actually in reality. I know you have to, develop all the service providers, the logistics, all hard work for small products to reach out to markets and consumers that are willing to buy this, but still don't have the channel rightful to access. So thank you, congratulations for the work. And the last panelist is Pedro Ronca from Cocoa Action. And I'm very fond of this initiative, especially because in the Amazon, we lack a lot of sector approach, where organizations and especially companies of different sizes go together to work on the competitive side of its industries. And I think what Pedro will introduce with the Cocoa Action is how a sector approach can make a difference in generating a whole economy in the area. And we are talking about cocoa, a commodity, but also we are talking about a huge opportunity with bioeconomy and agroforestry and social and economic results. So Pedro, thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you also for the invitation. Very glad to be here with you all and such interesting panel with friends. So it's a pleasure. So let me introduce you what Cocoa Action is about. Cocoa Action is an initiative of the World Cocoa Foundation. For the ones that do not know, the World Cocoa Foundation is a private sector organization, more than 100 companies that got together mainly to address sustainable development in the cocoa sector. In the world, Cocoa Action started in West Africa, where 70% of the cocoa production is, the world cocoa production is. And in Brazil, we started in 2018, basically on the approach that Karina just mentioned on the sector approach. We are working to promote sector transformation, putting the players together, not only private sector. We have 8 companies behind on the private sector behind Cocoa Action Brazil, but we also have public sector, third sector, NGOs. So it's basically we built a governance structure when we started in the pre-competitive arena, and that's an important concept that Karina mentioned, because we have companies that are competitors in the market, but here are working together to really address the common issues, the common challenges of the chain that basically are the 3 pillars of the sustainability, the traditional ones: economic, social, and environmental, people, profit, and planet. So we work hard to address improvement in these 3 pillars, but trying first. And when we started, just for you to understand, we had a situation of a lot of conflict in this chain that is due, of course, through a crisis that started 30 years ago when Brazil lost his leading position on cocoa producing and export due to the witch's broom disease. And since then, we are trying to recover as a country, and now we are only 7th producers in the world. And we do not even produce enough for our internal consumption. So we import cocoa for our internal industry, what is quite a shaming for us, but also a large opportunity for us, because we can grow production, we can grow productivity. And good news is that cocoa planted in Brazil with basic technology is a good business for smallholders. And we have basically the majority of our producers are smallholders, more than 80%. We have 93,000 cocoa producers in Brazil, the majority of them in the Bahia state, in the Atlantic forest. But the fastest growing region in Brazil is Marais state, an important state in the Amazon region, a huge state, and where cocoa is growing fast. But fortunately, cocoa is not a driver of deforestation. We are working also with Embrapa to produce a scientific paper to show that, and Embrapa has already done some initial studies to show that cocoa is growing basically in Marais state in the Amazon over degraded pasture lands or pasture lands that receive this agroforest system. That's another good point to mention, that Brazil is growing basically using agroforest systems. That's a very interesting model to preserve the Amazon and also the Atlantic forest. And it's the basis for both Bahia and Pará, the 2 largest states that produce cocoa. They both use these agroforest systems. And we have been working also to promote it. Also in the juridical and legal side, we have been able to, together with the state of the Amazon government, they were able to release a new normative that allows growers, for example, to recover and to comply with the forest code by recovering their legal reserve. That is exactly what the forest code demands for growers to have as preserved areas. That in the Amazon is 80% of the land needs to be, but many growers do not have this 80% preserved. So they need to recover it with forests. but now they can legally recover it with agroforest systems of cocoa, using, of course, native trees, and cocoa is a native tree from the Amazon. So this is really good news because it's a type of incentive, because it's very hard to convince a grower to plant forests if they do not reach this 80%. But if they can plant agroforest systems, it's really a good alternative because it's profitable, and that's also important to reinforce, because if you reach good productivities in cocoa production in Brazil, you can be very profitable, and for smallholders, it's definitely a good business, and even much more profitable than, for example, cattle production, 6 to 10 times more profitable per hectare than the cattle production in the Amazon, for example. So it's really a good alternative to provide income for smallholders in Brazil as a general. But of course, we need to reach high productivity that we do not have now. The average productivity in Brazil is very low. It's around 300 kilos per hectare. The good one would be around 1,000 kilos per hectare. Not hard to get there on the technical side. But of course, we have a lot to increase. And by that, we definitely need to increase technical assistance, credit access, and also the growers organization through cooperatives. And we have been working hard, even with Karina, in a project that we just launched, an additional effort that we just launched last week, to really provide technical assistance, credit access, and support 8 cooperatives in the Amazon to be more professional, and also for them to reach the credit that is available. Like in the last panel, we could see that there is a lot of resources available with good interest rate in Brazil, $40 billion annually. That is our Plano Safra, that's our available for our crops. But cocoa is not getting this money. So we want to unlock it because it's there, it's available. And we have a goal to unlock 32 million reais together with Conexus on this partnership in the next 4 years. And in these last years, we have created the, let's say, the enabling environment in the sector in Brazil to really enable cooperation and partnership that was not existing before. And now the mood, now the trust is much better. And this was a 3-year effort to really put the chain together, to really, establish trust, build cooperation, build partnerships. It's a kind of very hard work to show off, but we that are here in the field in Brazil, we feel it now that a lot of projects are coming, a lot of interest is growing for the cocoa sector in Brazil. A lot of partnerships are being set to really put this chain where it deserves to be in Brazil. That is in a better place. Also because cocoa is definitely and can be a driver of reforestation of the Amazon, as I said, due to this agroforest system model, also very profitable. So we are very excited with the momentum that was created. Of course, it's a partnership. It's done together. Public sector is involved, federal level, state level, municipality level. And it's a huge effort to put people together. But it's working and we are moving, we're making progress. And we were only able to launch this new initiative last week for the coming 4 years because of this environment that was created. And I think this is something really important to stress because we are only able to produce a sustainable production if we create an environment of trust between the chain, and the chain is really dependent from each other, from each part of the sector. And if we fight and if we have conflicts, no one will win. And sustainability is really about putting people together to cooperate and to build and to create solutions that is exactly what we are doing here together, and also to put sustainability in the center of the agenda of the cocoa sector in Brazil, because it was not there. And this is also something that we have been pushing. And so bringing discussions on deforestation, on child labor, on working conditions, on promoting decent work, and of course, promoting a profit for growers, because if we don't manage to allow growers to have profit, they will never be sustainable, not even in the environmental and social side. So I think it's enough for now. Let's take the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pedro. I think we have like 3 very good examples of how the economy in the Amazon is developing, the types of businesses that are emerging, entrepreneurial, with the business sector, business mindset, community-based enterprises, lots of intermediates growing. So to help the sector to move on, sector approaches, I think there's this diversity in the next few years will show enormous growth and diversity. And one of the engines for that to happen is definitely how capital how capital can grow and help these organizations to scale and to be sustainable and to reach out to markets. I think Pedro touched upon the question of using rural credit as an engine, a financial engine for that. But I wanted to take this larger and ask the panelists how investments and capital can offer a solution for you, and what types of capital and investments should be able to help you. And just to highlight some things, in the previous panel, Juliana Assunção said that we need to change the incentives for the financial system, for the financial markets, to see the bioeconomy and to create incentives for that kind of economy and businesses. And what we have right now is a lot of ideas of how to do that in the Amazon, but very little still there. And part of this, from the investor perspective, we as Connexus, we are working in this financial markets development, is that we don't have pipelines. Yeah? So we don't have organizations ready for the type of venture capital financial investments that we need. And when we talk with you, the businesses who are growing businesses, you say, okay, the capital has to be different, has to be in a different perspective, different amounts, and associated with different supports, and maybe targeting the services and that are cost-cut in terms of developing logistics or management services or marketplaces and things like that aggregate value to lots of nations. So I'll throw a question to all of you to ask from your perspective, what an investment side can help your business grow or your sector grow, and what would be the ideal type of investment that can help you in that direction and could help the sector you are in. I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Paola.
Okay, so looking at this project, the project was about the cost about 25 million reais, and it was mostly self-funded. Bertolini, like Mr. Bertolini Irani, he arrived in the Amazon 43 years ago as a truck driver, and he has been an innovator from the beginning. So he couldn't get like the caçambas for the trucks, so he mounted a factory. He couldn't get boats, so he actually had a shipyard. So I think they are in a comfortable position at this point that I believe they tried to get financing and they couldn't, just because of the nature of the project. This is something that no one had attempted before to do, and no one really knew how it would come out. So as far as I know, the project is all funded by the company itself. They couldn't get financing for it. And the solar part, it was, I think, a partnership, but I don't know how much, if there was actually a financial input with Valmont and BYD who did the project. But as far as I know, in terms of I'm sure the second barge that they're planning on doing in the future, they will get financing, but right now, like, I don't think any financing was available for this project.
Thanks, Paula.
Just let me add some points on this. Well, in my opinion, the three most important challenges to develop bioeconomy, to develop a business like those in Amazonia, we have three main challenges. First, logistics. And then, for sure, logistics, it's a challenge for any kind of business, any kind of activity in all parts around the world. But specifically in Amazonia, logistics, it's very, very tricky. It's a challenge much higher than in other places, because sometimes we are discussing about how we can do to get a product in 2 or 3 days. There we have some places that will spend 1 week, not to put this product in Europe, but to put this product in a capital, in a city, where this could be shipped and sent to Europe. So logistics, it's very, very, very difficult. Management skills is another one. But now, let me talk about financing. That's the third one. Until now, Connexus, it's a fantastic experience in trying to create innovative financing products, services to the bioeconomy in Amazon, but we still need some different types in terms of fees, in terms of terms for financing, guarantees, because most of, for example, we are working with community forest management. Those groups are implement forest management activities in a public protected area. They not own the land area. They're not owning the land, but they have a permission, a formal permission, and then sometimes we have some discussions with some bank, for example, said, no, but it's a not real guarantee. What's kind of a real guarantee in Amazonia beyond that? So we are discussing in the previous panel, Andrea and Juliano mentions the land robbers, the people who are occupying public areas. And then they are doing that for grants. And to the other hand, we have a lot of obstacles, have a lot of difficulties to access creditors, to have some special financial services suitable to this kind of economy. And when you're talking about this kind of economy, it is businesses. We're not discussing about the marketing. We can open new markets. We can open niches of markets with high value, but we're still facing a lot of challenges in terms of credit, in terms of financing, because there are no specific products that it's adequate to this kind of businesses in terms of, again, fees, timing, terms, and guarantees.
Just to pick up on this point, Beto, just and give some numbers. Yeah, the rural credit in Brazil, it lends to a small producer, a family farmer, at 2 or 3% a year, which is very subsidized for Brazil. And it's mostly accessible by cattle, but basically cattle ranching and grains. 97% of the rural credit for family agriculture is accessed by these sectors of the agriculture. So they get these incentives and it allows them to have economic viability. But when you look at the extractivist communities which are in the public land and conserving the forest, yeah, they have this value added to the economy, which is an externality at the moment and not accountable in financial negotiation. They are lending, and we are working with them, so we can see they are lending for 3-5% a month. So we are not talking about a difference of like 20% of difference in interest rates and fees. We are talking about 10 times more the cost of capital from cattle ranching to cocoa or to timber or anything else. So it's really hard to compete in terms of economic efficiency if we don't lower these rates and create like mechanisms that will target the specific groups that are not looking for guarantees, that are patient, that are looking into not economic results only, but also on results on the forest. So I can see lots of movements from impact investors looking to how this conservation of forests. So if you're producing inside a extractivist reserve, you could insure these loans with different forms. And many times you don't need guarantees. This is something that the banks put on for investments, but we can start with like small, like, you know, microfinance. We start with the small capital, working capital. So you learn how to lend, you know how to repay, you know the default rates, and then you move on to investments. And I think we had to understand the cycle so that these businesses can go through the journey of learning how to use finance in favor of their development. And just to finish,
sure. Because I think that we have to add in these different types of capital investments also the environmental services of those forests.
Yes, exactly.
So that's the reason that in Amazon, for example, we are not talking about only products, but also environmental assets. We must to consider the forest as an asset for different types of business. And then we need to include, for sure that is not enough, but when we combine in an intelligent way, credits, loans, special finances, and environmental services, this is the power, it's a very, very powerful arrangement.
Exactly. And if you account for that, you can lower the risks and you can change the cost benefit that we are still struggling to show that this has results more powerful than this discussion of the interest rates or the credit. I think there's a lot to learn about that, and we have to be eager to test. I would say that we don't have time to think about the huge funds of funds, or you have to start slow and try the mechanisms and see how financial agents can get into this model, how investors can get in, how venture philanthropy, you know, the philanthropy that is taking risk also to develop these sectors. And I think that can make a lot of difference in thinking about our targets for 2030 in terms of climate change and have recovery, large amounts of areas with economic sustainability. Pedro, I would like to hear your remarks on this. And also, I think we are going to the end of this panel, unfortunately. And so I'll please do your comments and any final remarks you may have, and then I'll move to the others.
Okay, thank you, Karina. Yeah, I think it's a great question because we are really looking for alternatives for investment besides what we already have available in Brazil. That is a lot, but not enough for the sector. And of course, cocoa producing in a sustainable way, being a good business for growers and also for the planet, meaning environmental friendly approach with social and decent working conditions. That's definitely what investors would like to invest on. And so it's really appealing. And we are looking for alternatives also, talking with banks and also with investors, trying to identify new opportunities for new credit lines or new approaches. But definitely there is a lot of room to work on that. And we would be glad to join this discussion more than we already are, because we have been also created a working group inside our cocoa sectorial chamber only to discuss credit access for growers in Brazil. This includes several organizations, including Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Agriculture, and state level also to put the sector together with the banks the public banks and private banks to really unlock this credit that is there available, and also to find new solutions. And there is a lot of opportunities there for the sector, and it's really needed. We need to overcome this bottleneck for credit access in Brazil for the cocoa sector, and that's why it's one of the key priorities. And in fact, we have already been able to move some credit lines that, for example, were not open for the cocoa, like the Plan ABC, that's agriculture for low carbon. It's a very interesting credit line that Brazil created. That is, since last year, one cocoa grower was able to take it, and before it was not allowed, and now more growers are looking for it, and we, of course, we want to increase that. So happy to get this discussion further later in another opportunity. Thanks a lot for the invitation, for the Chamber of Commerce. It's a pleasure to be here. Congratulations for the very good level of discussion in this event. Thanks also for our great partner, ABICAB, the Brazilian Association of the chocolate industry. And of course, for the Chamber, for the invitation. We'll be glad to share more on what is happening in the cocoa sector in Brazil. That's really a transformation that is taking place. Thanks a lot.
Paola?
Oh, thank you. I think a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. I think in terms of the financing, especially for the communities and the families, one of the things, for example, with our project, we pay them not in cash, but we pay them in bank transfer or a check. And what came up is that a lot of people don't have bank accounts. They're not even a grid of a bank account. So how can they get financing if they don't even understand how a bank account works? So I think a lot of it is really the part that they have to even educate, the person who's on the ground, the small farmer, to what to look for, or their kids, whoever is more proficient in what to look for, and in how the financial system works, and how it can work for them in terms of financing their own their own business. So I think that's one of the big things that I'm sure it's being discussed with the banks, but I think education is prime on that. And in terms of last comments, I just want to thank you and Pedro and Beto for my panel mates for this great discussion, and thank again Elisa and Carolina from the BCCC and the CBC for the invitation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Beto?
So just to thank you again to the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, and all my colleagues in this panel, Pedro, Paula, Saad, and Karina. Just this morning, I was participating in the opening session of the Amazonia Forests Dialogue. It's a regional forum in the Brazilian Forest Dialogue. And someone mentioned that we are talking about a lot on this kind of bioeconomy. And then the man said, well, we need to include social bioeconomy. And someone mentioned, no, but in economy it's included in the social. But not always. We must do more explicit in terms of to include the social partners and the social element on this business on the Amazonia. Amazonia is not an area without people. We have a lot of people there. And then we have people that's depending on this livelihood from the forest. So thank you again. Thank you a lot for this opportunity. And well, I feel available. My contact is there. I provided the link to the mini doc on the Deve Rio Design Istanbul initiative. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Beto, Pedro, and Paola, for a very nice panel, very nice conversation. And I think we could stay hours here talking about what we could do and the opportunities to improve not only this business, but the whole business environment in the Amazon. I think there's lots of opportunities, lots of people looking into. It's very important that we are here at the Brazilian Canadian Chamber of Commerce talking about this That wouldn't happen a couple of years ago. So I think this market is picking up, and it's also bringing opportunities for us who are in the Amazon, trying to solve this problem, to find the ways to reach out to a nice solution for conservation and economy together. So thank you so much for that. Carolina, I'll hand over to you to close the debate. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Karina, for a great moderation. Thank you, Pedro, Beto, Paula, for the discussion. It's really good to see like how many sustainable projects are going on and all the incredible work that you guys are doing to really foster the local economy and help the locals to go further. So congratulations to all of you on those projects. Since we're talking about Amazon, one of the issues that were mentioned before is rastreability and certification, right? Like Paula mentioned, how she's going after some of her certifications and how important they are even to access international markets. We saw in the little poll that we did in the beginning that still a lot of people believe that the products that comes from Brazil are not sustainable. So how do we change that? In order to talk a little bit about rastreability and certifications, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Luciano Souza, partner in SS Combarrier and vice chair of the BCCC ESG committee that was launched a few months ago to talk about certificates and their role in achieving sustainability in agriculture. Just before I pass the mic to Luciano, I'd just like to apologize everyone for us to being running late, but I think the discussions are so interesting that is really, we could talk about this all week. So Luciano, thanks for being here, and it's all yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss and to talk with this audience about certificates. I pay attention in the last panel, so I will make some comparisons. So, well, thank you again, Carolina and the Canada Chambers. It's a pleasure to be here. I will try to, in the next 10 minutes, try to summarize and give some overview regarding certificates and certification, how those can, what are their role in achieving the sustainability in agribusiness. It's a not easy task actually, because as you may see, I took some quotes about Paola. She said that I think it's important to educate people regarding the financial issues. So if I can compare, we can say that certificates in somehow serves as a education tool for the business, for the stakeholders. I mean, to somehow to make it more professional, or to somehow helps the manager to hold and to drive their business. So I put some notes here just to drive our discussion here. So actually, what is certificate actually? So I know that it's a very high sophisticated audience, but maybe just to set the ground. So certification it's a sort of, it's a way to attest the requirements related to traceability, to quality, to origin. So it's a way to prove that some standards are being met, are being followed by the organization or by the company. So usually, I want to draw your attention for these benefits of agribusiness certificate. Usually, I heard from, in my private practice, sometimes I heard from some clients that, certifications or compliance programs or sort of regulatory issues are only to make it difficult to run our business. I don't like to see it in this perspective. I understand that when we are talking about a globalized world, when we are talking about ESG scenario, we are talking about this meeting here where we have this Canadian and Brazilian environment discussion. It is important to have some sort of certificate, some sort of guide. So just to make it more straightforward, so benefits from these certificates is to demonstrate the compliance of this current legislation, regulatory agencies, especially when you are talking international environment, when you're going to, for example, to sell your products abroad, it is important to have a standard where your, your buyer or your partner knows exactly that you are following the rules. It's very important today. It is also important to guarantee that the product remains in the market. We are seeing many problems in this regard when we are, especially in the agriculture environmental, we are seeing that sometimes many companies abroad are saying, okay, you sold me once, but I'm not sure about your traceability. So it is important to know, since you don't have any more, or since you don't have any certificate, I will not buy from you anymore. So it's in terms of a market share is also important. But if I can pick just one of these hot topics that I mentioned here, I would like to stress the third one. When we are talking about that, that's my view, especially when we are talking about so many very interesting. I want to congratulate the chamber, the Canada chambers. The last panel was really rich in terms of experience, in terms of successful experience. So, but I understand that when we are talking certificates, coming to my words here, I think that when we are talking about certificates, we can see some sort of help for this businessman, for this rural entrepreneur to draw their business, to drive their business. So it somehow helps to professionalize when you have to meet some standards, when you have to meet some rules. You have to somehow organize yourself, and this helps you to know more about your business in the end of the day. So we can also say that since later I would just talk about many examples of international certificate, Brazilian international certificates, but this helps to make sure that the conservation of this natural resource are being made, are being taken care of, and in the end of the day is resulting in a reduction of environmental impacts. So, and of course, in the end of the day, when you are talking a more organized business, when you are talking that, or providing information that you have as traceability or a very understandable chain of suppliers, you can have a better price. Here is not in terms only of, oh my God, it's going to be expensive or not. No, you can have a better price that could, how can I say that, express the value of the market, of the product. So that's the idea of this sentence. So in general terms, I understand that certificates are very, it's really important, and in ESG scenario that we are facing now globally, will be certainly one of the most important tools. And even if you don't agree, or even if you think that is not important, if you want, go abroad, or if you want to sell to specific market, you're gonna make sure that you have it. And from our experience, since we put this in place internally, makes everything more easy to drive the business. Going to some examples, of course, I will just pass at this one because I know that many of you are very familiar with this, but it's I divided this presentation, this example, in federal ones and the private certificates. So just to give a sense that, of course, we have some standards that must be followed by federal rules. So here, this federal service is a mandatory if you are talking about animals products. So it is important for any company or any organization that's dealing with this must meet this requirements to have this. You cannot sell the products without this stamp. So I just put some notes on how to obtain it. It's not exhaustive, of course, least it's not exhaustive requirements, but just to give a sense that in the end of the day, you can see by if you see all the others certificates that what I mean the federal government or the private company that provides this kind of certificate, what they want you to do is to give a certainty that many rules are met, are followed, because this is going to help you and the company to be in the market. It seems like I'm being repetitive, but this is the way it is, just simple as that. I mean, in terms of to develop, what I want to say is certificates must not be seen as a barrier or bureaucratic things. It must be seen for by the individuals, by the companies, as a very important tool to be in the market. Can be a difference, something different for you to provide it to your customers, to your stakeholders. So the other one I want to highlight is this Produto Orgânico Brasil related to organic products. So it's a mix of Ministry of Agriculture and National Institute of Metrology. It's a certificate where that, that must be provided by the company that the product has at least 95% of organic ingredients in its composition. So since you see that stamp at the product, it says that okay, this product is organic, has at least 95%. So it's not only consumer concerns, it is also important for for any sort of reasons to explore a market. I know that my time is running out. I don't want to postpone. I just want to draw your attention to two others certificate that is very important. This Selo Mais Integridade from Ministry of Agriculture is it's one of the most important certificates because it's more related to integrity, it's more related to slavery, labor, or environmental fines. So it gives a sense to the market if the companies follow the rules. It's simple as that. Sometimes the obvious must be said. So this stamp, it's one of the most important, and of course it's not required as the other ones, but brings to the company a value that's really important in this market, especially when we are talking about international standard or international markets. This Renova Bio, Caroline, this presentation you can share with the audience. So just going fast and not so in the specifics just because of the time. But I would like also to highlight the Renova Bio is more related to biofuels market, but it's sort of important and is one of the most recognized abroad. So it's it's federal, it's public, but shows how these kind of certificates are very important. So I think that what was interesting to share with you. As a private agribusiness certificate, I brought two examples for you. First of all, Global Gap, relate to good agricultural practice, set the standards of traceability, which is very important in many of the sectors of the agribusiness. It is a private sector, so you have to, at the company, the rural product producers must carry out an internal audit and to verify if they are able or not to apply for certification. So what they must assure that the traceability of their chain is guaranteed. So this is the idea of this private certificate. I would like to to bring this one for you before I finished and I hand over again to Carolina. A Rainforest Alliance certification. This, I think it was important because of the day we are talking about Amazon and the Amazon forest. So this seal, this stamp indicates that the farm and the forest or even the tourism business is open to this, met some environmental, social, and economic sustainability standards. I see that. I think that when I missed, but I think that then when Paola was showing some her presentation, I saw the stamp. So this brought us that idea that their organization met this criteria. So it's this recognized that if I'm an investor or if I want to do business with her, I know that specific agricultural crops, beef and dairy cattle are being handled properly. As we understand in this environmental here, we take care, we understand that environmental is important. So when I saw this kind of stamp, I know that that company or that organization carried out a very specific and a very difficult proceeding to have this certification. We have helped some companies and some clients in this regard. So we know that this is sometimes hard to provide this information, but even so, it's in this new era that we are facing, those kind of stamps are being more and more required. So if I can summarize my presentation, I would draw your attention to the second slide here with this benefits in agribusiness certificates. And I mean, I know that I'm running my time, but just make sure that I give you all the first reaction in this regard. And Carolina, I'm totally available if there is any question regarding this. But I mean, in terms of discussion, those are my first remarks. I know about the time, but sorry about this.
Thank you, Luciano. I believe that we don't have any questions right now. But if you have any question for Luciano, please send it in the Q&A box. And thank you again for bringing all this information for your contribution to the session. And now it's a pleasure to introduce Marcio Pereira. He's a partner in environmental law at BME Law to deliver the closing remarks. Welcome, Marcio.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, it's a real pleasure to take part of this BCC event. Mainly consider that you are talking about the agribusiness and the sustainability, key power matters to Brazil economy. I think that the event brought a comprehensive view of the sector, its challenges and the opportunities. Canada and Brazil are an international reference for the sector, attract constant investment in developing innovative solutions. In this context, my full service law firm, BME, has been working to advise clients how to invest in this sector and to deal with the sustainability aspects, considering Brazil law requirements and the voluntary private initiative, such as an agreement involving companies and suppliers in the chain in order to reduce the deforestation in Amazon area in Brazil. So in the beginning of this session, Dulce Bank brought to us an ESG perspective. João Adrian introduced the main key issues on the government investment program in Brazil. Global challenges in the biodiversity strategy conservation were deeply analyzed by other panelists. It was great opportunity to discuss this matter. Follow the previous speakers in the Carolina. I will ask to move on for the next. I would like to reinforce the sustainability large agenda in agribusiness in legal perspective. There are a number of approaches considered by the Brazilian law which together give the sector great advantage in international market, such as the low carbon economy, biofuel, animal welfare, biodiversity and genetic resources, soil and water conservation, and the risk management, just to name a few. So I will try to give some overview about the 5 points, okay? Just to provide some how consistent is the legislation on sustainability in this sector. The first, carbon economy, based on the Brazilian legislation and the Paris Agreement, the sector plan for the adaptation to climate change and the low carbon emission in the agriculture define a range of action, such as recovery of degraded areas, nitrogen biological fixing, and treatment of animal waste, such examples. Recently, the global strategy of that planning was reviewed by the government in order to consolidate a national agriculture based on sustainable systems, resilient and productive. In this second phase, the plan adds improvements in governance and in monitoring mechanisms. It's an evolution. In another front, low carbon agri-energy is supported by the National Biofuels Policy, or RenovaBio, as referred by Luciano. RenovaBio's objective is to expand the production of biofuels through mechanisms such as a system of decarbonization credits, with a view to make a significant contribution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Brazil. Established programs to support the production of ethanol and the biodiesel have demonstrated that these fuels are ecologically feasible and demonstrate the potential of plant-based energy sources such as soybeans, canola, peanuts, sunflower seeds, and the cotton seeds. Brazil, there is a huge potential in this area. Other important matter, the management of risk associated with rural production is addressed in the National Program for Agriculture Zoning of Climate Risks, another significant initiative directed to improve the quality and the availability of information on climate risks for agriculture in Brazil. It supports some agents in the finance market to consider climate risks identified by that program when granting financing. This initiative this initiative will certainly be taken by the capital markets in other types of financial transactions, such as green bonds and investments with social impact. Move on. This the second point I would like to bring for the audience is the organic production, which improved a lot in Brazil. On an equally promising front, the regulation of organic production expanded market options.
I have a wait list of people.
The legislation gives special treatment to products used in organic agriculture. For example, phytosanitary products. Consider that organic agriculture inputs have a low environmental impact. The legislation establishes a simple registration process for phytosanitary products while addressing concerns about safety and environmental impact of such products. Also, a national Biome inputs program was created by Brazilian government to meet the growing demand from society and the producers for bio-based inputs and sustainable products. There is an initiative called Integrated Agriculture Production that is present in the various production chains. This integrated program focus on employing good agriculture practice to ensure that productive process result in quality plant and plant-based products containing levels of chemicals and contaminants that meet health and safety standards. It also supports the use of natural resources and replace polluting inputs, and ensures that agriculture's produce can be tracked in the primary stage of the production chain. Okay. Move on for animal welfare. Animal welfare has also been the subject of regulations, focusing on development of practice and techniques as can be seen from the recommendations on good practice for the welfare of production animals in the livestock, which covers production and transportation systems and stunning methods for human slaughter of livestock. Regarding water, according to national policy on water resources, which established main instruments for the management of water resources, the use of water must be previously granted by the water agency in compliance with the water resource planning and the rules of the river-based committees. It's very important for agriculture sector to provide water for the companies. Recently, the use of water resources has been becoming more complex with restriction that has impacted all sectors of the economy due to the stress caused by climate change, especially in agriculture sector. In the end, I would like to talk a little bit about biodiversity. The federal law established the rules for access to genetic resources, associate traditional knowledge and the benefit share. It's a great policy in Brazil. The law provides for various ways of share the benefits generated by products developed using genetic resources from the biodiversity and the monetary benefits and the non-monetary benefits, which can involve transfer of technology, free distribution of the product under social programs, and license the product free of charge, among other possibilities to return for the community. Another matter involved biodiversity is rated by the biosafety law in Brazil. This law provides for the safety and inspection mechanisms for the use of genetic engineering techniques for the research, manipulation, transportation, commerce, and disposal of genetically modified organisms. The law aims at protecting public health and the environment in Brazil. Finally, the Forest Code, which was commented by other panelists, established rules for vegetation removal and power authorization, as well as creates a rural environmental register to control and monitor the use of rural land in sector. It's a mandatory electronic systems to all rural properties in Brazil. This law creates permanent preservation areas in the legal reserves, part of the rural properties, which must be protected by the owner by the owner in Brazil. Connected with this law and this kind of preservation, there is a good possibility for the properties. It means the payment for ecosystem service brings opportunities for varying biodiversity conservation. In the forest, you'll be able to generate credits to be traded in the market, provide financial resources for those who conserve the forest. So I just present some legal examples, but there are more. But I don't have much more time. So in short, as long as agriculture is the main engine of the Brazilian economy and essential during the pandemic period and for the post-COVID recovery, I believe Brazil legislation has been improved and support the sector's sustainability strategy. So after that, Carolina, thank you and congratulations once more for this great event. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcio, for being part of here and for closing the event. I would like to ask Elisa to join us as well. And on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank all our speakers today and all our speakers in our previous session for the opportunity to be part of this, and to our guests to take the time of their busy schedule to join us and attend the first ever Brazil-Canada Agriculture Forum. We had over 250 attendees and registered, and we're very, very happy to be able to address so many different aspects of Brazil-Canada relations in agriculture. This is a very important sector for us and for the Brazil-Canada agenda. And stay tuned, as we'll be organizing a few other smaller events on different matters of the sector throughout the year. So we can put everything in 4 days or in 4 sessions, so there's more to come. I'd also like to thank again our sponsors for their support: Vale, Export Development Canada, Brookfield, Sescom Barrier, Lundin Mining, Toronto Stock Exchange and TSX Ventures, Nutring, Fairfax, Port St. John, and Mellahawk Logistics for the support, and our partners, Embassy of Brazil in Canada, the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply. But so thank you everyone again for attending. Thank you CCBC for the partnership, for working together on this initiative, and we're looking forward to many more initiatives together. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. On behalf of the CBC in São Paulo, I'd like to thank again all the participants, speakers, and partners of the 4 sessions of the forum. And as Carolina said, this was just the beginning of the discussion, and I'm sure we'll have many more forums and events to keep the discussion going. And of course, last but not least, I would like to thank Carolina and all BCC's team for the great work. And it was a pleasure working with you again. Thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Elisa. And also, just to let everybody know that all the first sessions have already been posted on our website. The recordings are there. We will be posting this session as well in the next couple of days, together with all the presentations and the PowerPoints. So if you have any questions, if you wanted to go back, please feel free to contact us or to contact the CCBC, and we'll be happy to connect you with the speakers from all the 4 sessions of this forum. Thanks again, everyone, for being here, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.